about what one does not see. But the Lord is not far away. The Lord is a visible reality. He loves, and He will come to dwell in you. And at this point, we see the title of the meeting make sense, which in fact comes from a very intense passage of a dense book of Don Giuseppe called The Youth and the Challenge. This is a dialogue between John Giuseppe and a university student during an assembly. And I'll put it into context, and then I'll give the floor immediately to Don Stefano Alberto. This young girl student, I don't think she was a university student. I think she was in the last year of high school. She said, for some time now, I have very strongly desired to have a great life, but I don't know what a great life is. And at the same time, I don't want to be mediocre, she said. Very often, I think that I am not able. I see how small I am. I see this very clearly, but I realize when I look at things with lucidity that what I have met is truly great. And then he went on, this is a crescendo, and Don Giuseppe says, this wonderful provocation of you says something very simple, he said. You want to be great. This desire is part of and is second nature to the human heart. That the natural impulse that makes us yearn for great things is the heart. And therefore, as he said to the young girl, follow your heart. Now, this is a very strong provocation on the part of Don Giuseppe, because the heart is not just a word for people who live in a certain way. It becomes a fact of our existence. And it places us before the reality of things. And Don Stefano Alberto will help us to go deeper into this provocation. A new beauty, a new pain, a new good, of which we will be soon satiated to better savor new type of wine, a new life, an infinite number of new lives. This is what I need, gentlemen, just this, nothing more. How can we bridge this abyss in life? What can we do? Because desire is always there, stronger and even stronger than ever. And it's like a fire at sea whose flames are whipped up by the deep black. It's a desire to embrace infinite possibility. Miguel Mañara's cry was this that we heard last year at the meeting, was followed by Camus' Caligula that we heard a couple of evenings ago in his dialogue with his faithful Helicon. He said, I am not mad. I have never been as reasonable as now. Simply, I suddenly felt a need for the impossible. Things as they stand don't appear satisfactory to me. Now I know this world as it is and as it stands cannot be supported. I need the moon, happiness or immortality. In other words, I need something which is perhaps without sense, but something which is not of this world. Camus himself took up the apparent paradox in the affirmation which was dear to the 1968 French student movement, Soyez réaliste, demandez l'impossible, be realistic, ask for the impossible. But what realism are we talking about? Is it not perhaps a utopia or folly? this is Don Giussani's response in the comment to the passage I've just mentioned of Caligula. It's not realistic that man live without yearning for the impossible, without this opening up to the impossible, without this nexus with the beyond, without whatever the confines of this beyond is. And in this sense, the impossible indicates the infinite, and the insatiable dissatisfaction of Caligula expresses this tension towards that infinite. And when Claudel puts in the mouth of Pietro di Crayon in Jeune Fille Violaine, he says, the insatiable can only come from the inextinguishable. And Don Giussani commented on that. That man is an insatiable animal means that the subject of this reality, which is called man, is an inextinguishable subject. Caligula speaks of the moon, or happiness, or immortality. The insatiable can only derive from something that is inextinguishable. Insatiability is the sign of destiny. Here we see emerge now the great word that no one, however much of an effort he or she makes, and whatever he does, not even in his or her dream can he detach himself from. A destiny of immortality is part of the human experience of insatiability. Second passage, eternal mystery of our being. This insatiability, this inexhaustibility of our desires and the questions that man puts exalt the contradiction between the impulse and the impetus of requirements and the limits that human beings have in the search for this, and the dramatic awareness expressed by Giacomo Leopardi in one of his thoughts. Not being satisfied by any earthly thing, nor, to put it in another way, anything on the whole earth, considering the inestimable breadth of space, the number and the enormity of the marvels of the world, and finding that all this is little and small in the capacity of human soul, imagining a number of infinite worlds, infinite universe, and hearing that the soul and our desire would even be greater than this universe, and always accuse things of being insufficient, of being a nullity, and to suffer loss and emptiness and boredom. This seems to me the greatest sign of greatness and nobility that we see in human nature. The sentiment of this disproportion for Leopardi is the content of, and shows that what he calls the sublimity of feeling. I recall very vividly the last time Marco was present, the last time that Don Giussani, on the 22nd of March 1996, when the most beautiful poems of Leopardi were published and edited by him, by the Biblioteca dello Spirito Cristiano. He, and the title was very interesting. Before the students of the Milan Polytechnic, he in fact talked about his love of Leopardi, the poet from Recanati, a poet that he'd loved from when he was in the seminary. And I'm going to take three passages of the writings of Don Giussani, of his love for Leopardi. And we see the surprise of the extent and the depths to which the heart takes us in these words. And this shows us the sublimity of the feelings for Leopardi, for Don Giussani. In fact, he saw the following text as the most beautiful of him. On the portrait of a beautiful woman engraved on her funeral monument. And where the humans infinite desires or the visions create in vague thoughts. This is Dante's Ulysses, who's challenging the world. And where the human spirit wanders, a discordant sound strikes the ear, that paradise goes in a flash. Human nature, if mean and debased, and made of dust and shadow, you feel so much. How is it that your most worthy thoughts and acts spring from and are quenched by such base reasons? And Don Giussani said that this is an unresolvable, inconceivable contrast. The eternal mystery of our human being, human nature, he says. How can, if you are so banal, how can you have such wide-spreading, great thoughts? And if there is something noble in you that goes beyond corruption and the corruptibility of matter, how come the most worthy of your acts spring from or are spent by such base reasons? The circumstance creates the input for great sentiment. The same circumstance that carries with it the impossibility of pursuing it for the disappointment that follows and that it has in it. This is the situation that Leopardi is concerned with and which he has seen in himself. Third passage, we will not advance a step beyond ourselves. The eternal mystery of our being. For Giussani, the real Leopardi is here, not in the desperate final negation of La Ginestra, the poem called The Broom, whereby Leopardi is now exalted by contemporary culture as being a precursor of nihilism. But perhaps isn't it right, as Natalino Sapegno said, when he termed Leopardi's final questions as an obsession, confused, indiscriminate, arbitrary reflections of the adolescent, a primitive summary philosophy, i.e. questions like what is life, what's it for, what's the end of the universe, and why should there be pain? Those very questions, Sapegno continues, which a true and mature philosopher distances himself from because absurd and not having any authentic speculative value, and therefore not giving any answer nor providing any possibility of going further. No, we would say, in response to that comment, we would retort, no, these are my questions. This is what I ask. Without this, there is no humanity, no possibility of expressive grandeur. And this is what the great Russian pianist says, Maria Yudina. She says, I am fully aware of my sins and my weaknesses, but I dare think that the greatness of man does not derive mainly from his gifts, but rather from the impetus to dare that something that dies is born with him and dies after him in his heart, this thirst for the infinite. And as Dostoevsky said, to silence this would mean to cut out Cicero's tongue, to gorge out Copernicus's eyes, and to stone Shakespeare. And yet, in the drama of this unresolvable contrast between the ideal aspiration and the greatness of one's desire and the impossibility of realizing this, man tends to cede out of tiredness, out of fragility. because he is impatient to have a complete answer, or he presumes to be able to give that answer to himself. Because I do not recognize the possibility of an answer, therefore I tend to reduce, or I attempt to empty of any sense these final questions which make up my human essence. Before the first is a lack of sync between life and destiny, and then there's a separation which comes later, and then finally a desperate negation. That is the offshoot of that. Wisdom would be to remain within one's own measure, in other words, not go beyond oneself, and this becomes the necessary condition for living. One of the most effective formulations, and certainly one of the statements which are most dense of significance, is the classical affirmation of David Hume, the philosopher, who starts his fundamental work, A Treatise of Human Nature, in this way: let us fix as much as possible our attention outside of ourselves. Let us push our imagination up to the heavens and to the extreme limits of the universe. But we will never really advance a step beyond ourselves, nor will we be able to conceive any other kind of existence than the perceptions that come into our restricted circle. Man who restricts himself within his own limits finishes proud and desperate, and it cultivates these illusions of autonomy, this pretense of self-sufficiency, and when he doesn't expect anything more. And Pavese writes this in one of his poems: there is nothing more bitter than the dawn of a day in which nothing will happen. The slowness of the ticking of the hour is pitiless for he who expects nothing. The bitter outcome is, after this presumption, disillusionment. Indeed, as Nietzsche cries out, contempt for one's own humanity, reason, freedom, thirst for happiness, contempt as a condition to pass beyond man. Everything is reduced to nothing. This is Zarathustra's cry in paragraph 3 of the prefix of the book of the same name. What is the maximum experience that you can live? The hour of great contempt, the hour in which you are overwhelmed by contempt for your own happiness and even for your reason and for your virtue, the moment in which you shall say, what importance has my happiness? This is indigence and wretchedness. It is a wretched well-being, but my happiness should justify even my existence. The moment when you say, what does my reason matter? Perhaps it yearns for knowledge like the lion yearns for food. It is indigence. It is a wretched well-being. The moment in which you will say, what importance does my virtue have? It's never made me furious. Now I am tired of my good and my ill. Everything is indigence and wretchedness and miserable wretchedness. Fourth passage. As a tower in a solitary field, you are a giant in the midst of her. The infallible heart. In the confusion that we all find ourselves in life, with many manifestations of this confusion, to say it in the word of Hannah Arendt, the rebellion of man against human existence that has been given to him, a free gift coming in profane terms from I don't know where, what man desires to exchange with something that is possible, something of his own making. And in this sort of climate that is summed up by Arendt, none of us can shirk, at the risk of losing himself, his duty to his own humanity within the real world and recognize in experience those factors, indeed that factor which is and continually works in us as the original criterion of judgment. In this case too, let us look at the discovery of this phenomenon as Giussani has mentioned it, and how it comes out in Leopardi, in the poem The Dominant Thought. Powerful and most kind, ruler of the hidden depths of my mind, awe-inspiring but precious, gift of the gods, dear friend of my most dismal days, you, thought, returning so to my gaze, who does not talk of the mystery of your being? Who does not know its power? And yet, whenever we hear what we can do, experience acting upon us like a good to make us speak, it strikes like something new. How solitary has my intellect become since you began to take it from your home, swift as lightning, flashed from all around, all other thoughts of mine have vanished clear away. And like a tower on a bare field, you stand within my mind, giant and alone. In this contrast, says John Giussani, which extends in time, in the evolution of time and human work, there is one thing, there is a phenomenon. The phenomenon of a thing which is uncorruptible in the face of this struggle of contrasts and can't be shattered. Everyone talks of this, and yet it is always new. Immediately, it takes its cue from the woman, the beloved. In other words, from something that one loves more than usual. Everything disappears and wanes away when you fix your eyes on this presence. But if the symbol of this phenomenon is the woman, the beloved, the phenomenon is much wider and larger than the opportunity that this being and time sweeps away, as it will sweep me away. This phenomenon, we can say, is the thirst for beauty, the thirst for truth, the thirst for happiness. It is the heart. Man perceives inside himself that there is a destiny for happiness, truth, beauty, goodness, and justice. We all judge on the basis of these things, at least, even superficially. Most of us do to a certain extent. But what is most striking is that we can't take this away. We can't distract ourselves from this. In the midst of the great ruin, in the words of Dante, there is this impetus, this grandiose thing, this powerful ruler over the hidden depths of my mind, all inspiring but precious. The other thoughts in my mind vanish away. What is interesting is not so much the typical feminine reference that Leopardi makes, and he expects for an answer from the woman for his thirst for happiness. It's the very existence of this phenomenon that is striking, and that time and life cannot define or reduce or shatter. All men live this. If man does not live this phenomenon, he will starve, he will die of hunger. To the extent that man does not live this, he does not realize, he does not, in the extent to which he cannot feed of this, he becomes null. In a universal shipwreck. Marco mentioned this in his introduction. We all talk about the heart, but we reduce the word heart to an idea of sentiment, to a range of sentiments and feelings. This happens, and all of us do it. We often mean that the heart is the realm of the subjective and the irrational, as opposed to the objective and the rational. And we underscore and increase this divide between the rational and the emotional, something that Caron has mentioned many times. I'd like to mention, but I can't develop it fully, that this dualistic fracture and separation is the origin of this very notion of the human nature, which in fact is either negated in the name of absolute freedom. We could cite Sartre, for example, freedom which is unshackled from any relations, from any recognition of self, from historic conditionings or existential conditions. It's an absolute freedom which self-determines in every sense and in every way. Or it could be seen as a nature which is reversed to our genetic traits and makeup that can be measured and are determined by science. Science which today presents, even if with some interesting examples, as the only way of ascertaining certainty. What remains that is really human, therefore? Inviting us to go with our experience, Giussani helps us to recoup and to relive like no one else has done before. Live in our contemporary thought, and no educator and contemporary man has been able to do this. He allows us to understand in a new way the significance of the biblical notion of heart. Traditionally in the Bibbia, heart would seem to be the site of the original impetus of the person, the very spring of the conscious being and the conscious free being. Giussani's is a conception which is very strongly one of unity. And as he preserves this separation, he underlines objectivity, the structural data of this original thing. The heart is a primordial fact, a primordial experiment, which makes up the face of man as he experiences reality. The heart is the criterion of judgment that is in us. It is immanent in us. It is an interior imprinting, but we don't decide it. It is given with our being born men and man. I have in me the criterion to know what really I have before me in terms of a reality. So what does this heart consist of? And let's read one of the most famous passages of the religious sense. It's a complex series of evidences in which man is projected into this confrontation with everything that exists. Nature launches a man into a universal comparison with himself, with other people, with things, giving it as a tool for this universal confrontation, a complex of evidences and original demands, which are so original that everything that man says or does depends on it and on them. An Eskimo mother, a mother from the Terra del Fuoco, a Japanese mother, give birth to human beings that are all recognizable as human beings, both in terms of their external features, but also in terms of their interior imprinting and mark. And so when each one of them will say I, they would use this word to indicate a multiplicity of elements derived from different histories, traditions, and circumstances. But without doubt, when they say I, they will use this expression also to indicate their interior face or being, a heart, the Bible would said, which is equal in each and every one of them, even if translated into the most diverse, in the most diverse ways. And here we have the roots are laid down to allow us to overcome that exasperated subjectivism, that affirmation of self to the infinite degree, which for us is the most fascinating of temptations. But Giussani continues, is so fascinating as it is deceitful and deceiving. And it's the force of this lie for the very fact that it is fascinating that it induces man to forget and then to die. It's much greater and much truer to love the infinite, to embrace reality and being, rather than affirm oneself and assert oneself before any reality, because in truth man affirms himself really and truly only by accepting reality, what is real, so much so that man starts to affirm himself by accepting that he exists, accepting a reality, in other words, that has not been given by him, is not his doing. I have not given myself unto myself. I have been made. This is the first evidence that we see when we come into contact and we have an impact with the real. And this is in chapter 10 of the religious sense. It is in the impact with reality that the heart, this complex and yet simple experience, sets off immediately this realization. The heart emerges, and this is an important passage, as the series of criteria with which reason judges itself. You could say that the heart is the conscience of reason. It's the elements that reason needs to exist in each individual experience, in the understanding and identification of criteria that judge experience and with which experience can judge the world. This emergence of criteria for reason is immediate. It's automatic. And here, this is an affirmation which seems surprising, but only at first sight. In other words, the heart is identified with the reason and is the conscience of reality, the knowledge of reality in all its factors, in its full sense. It is intelligence, affective knowledge. It is the light of intelligence that is affected, in Latin affecta, because reason is activated and becomes activated when it is affected, not when it is imposed. And Giussani himself, in a passage of the self-consciousness of the cosmos, says, why should we call it heart rather than reason? Because the heart, he replies, is the place of affectus. But affectus is not an antithetical to reason. It's the ultimate aspect of reason, of the reasonable dynamic, and therefore the heart is the seat of those that evidence of those original needs which project themselves on the individual, to register what that individual is, to see and allow for self-consciousness and the totality of all factors. And region, therefore, picks up and grasps reality, sustained by the affective ability of the judgment which is developed between reality and the heart. And then we see come into play the sword of freedom that can accept the state of affairs, and acceptance is love. Being says you, but he is also free not to accept, and this will be lie. This will lead to a lie, because the logic of this not accepting is nothing.
The content of the experience is reality, but experience is not, as one would normally think, simply feeling something. What you feel turns into experience once it's judged by the heart criteria. If it is really true, if it is really beautiful, if it is really good, if it is really happy. Every experience implies an elementary experience. That is, each experience is judged by something which is inside it and which is called elementary experience. It is the inevitable perception of what man is seeking in all things, because of self-satisfaction, because he wants to be complete and happy. Let me insist on this once again. Man is educated by experience, not by what he feels. In addition to this, the criteria which turn what we feel into an experience are infallible. Be aware of this. Certainly they are infallible as criteria, not as judgments. There may be infallibility which is applied in the wrong way or not applied at all, even contradicted, as we experience all too often. But in all circumstances of life, in all moments of life, reality makes the hard criteria emerge. That is the ultimate need to be oneself, really oneself. A moment is enough for this. It's a delicate last possibility. Let me remind you of an anecdote which was reported by all the press. It's about Richard Rudd, an Englishman, 43 years old. Richard has always told his family that had something happened to him, he would not want to be kept alive by a machine, never. But he was wrong. After being paralyzed in a motorbike accident in October 2009, the 43-year-old English bus driver, at the very last moment before the machine was disconnected, made everything possible to make the physicians understand that he did not want to die. He just showed this with a sign of his pupil. And 3 times in a row he said yes to the physician, asking him whether he wanted to continue living. And so was it. Today, 9 months after that terrible moment, Rod is still paralyzed and in need of steady care, but communicates with his family members, with his daughters. He smiles, moves his eyes and head. A moment is enough. An instant is enough, even in extreme circumstances or painful, complex circumstances. One instant, one moment is enough. It's enough for the heart to be struck and reawakened, and for it to strongly make his voice heard, its voice heard. Let's proceed further. We said that reason, that is the conscience of reality in all its factors, continuously regenerates and uses as the ultimate criterion judging the relationship between man and reality, as according to the principles which are inside him and his heart. We should ask ourselves, is this true, that this is all? Let me quote the famous example of the alarm clock, as suggested by Father Giussani. Imagine there is an alarm clock, a big one, on the kitchen table, not an electronic alarm clock, but the conventional one. There was a very active, curious child at home. His mother and father have gone away. His smaller sister, his younger sister, is there. And this active, curious child sees the alarm clock on the table. He looks around, takes the alarm clock and completely disassembles it in many pieces. You can count these pieces. He was a very clever child and counted up to 353 pieces. So the alarm clock is made up of 353 smaller and bigger pieces. Some time has elapsed. His parents are about to come back. At that point, this child is no longer able to put the 353 pieces together to form the alarm clock. Why can't he do so? Because something is missing. He doesn't have the idea, the mental idea of the alarm clock. He's a small child, not a Swiss watchmaker. The reason, that is, the child's mind, is not capable of assembling the alarm clock again. Just one factor is missing, the ideal, the mental idea of an alarm clock. In this way, the reason implies that one states that the mystery exists, and by mystery we mean a factor which is present in all experiences. A factor, however, which does not belong to factors which can be experienced, can be counted, calculated in experience. The idea of the alarm clock goes beyond the level of the individual components, of the individual pieces. It's not another piece. It's something completely different. But without perceiving and recognizing the mystery as a factor belonging to reality, there is no experience, no true experience, no full and complete experience, no matter what we're talking about. Reality spurs us to look for something else beyond what immediately appears to our eyes, something else which is the ultimate meaning, the ultimate significance of what we see. It's the dynamics of the sign. Blocking this dynamics and stopping at the level of an immediate reaction, at the level of what simply appears, as is often the case, would be like quenching the original drive with which the heart, if challenged, aims at what is real. Let's go back to the dialogue between Giussani and Leopardi to understand how Leopardi experiences this dynamics, especially in the hymn to Aspasia, who was his most important lover. It is as if he said, "You were really beautiful. You were beautiful, but your beauty was not responsible for itself. Your beauty was like the ultimate voice of the expression of a heart which was hidden, concealed. Alternatively, it was like the beginning of a perspective where you could not see the end beyond you. Lady, your beauty seemed to me a light divine within my mind. Beauty has the same effect as music is harmony. Both may reveal, it seems, the deep mystery of unknown Elysium. The stricken man must then live on in longing for the child of his own mind. Father Giussani says, it's not a light divine, but her beauty appears like something else. The beauty of this woman's face is the instrument to show something different. If the value of something is inside something else, you say that the first thing you see is a sign. The stricken man must then live on in longing for the child of his own mind. That face attracts the poet because of its beauty, but creates a perspective. It is a sign, it is a reality which is a sign and which has value since it is a sign. Faced with reality, faced with reality as a sign, the heart must admit the existence of something which is ununderstandable and unreachable. However, it still desires to become aware of that unknown. Hannah Arendt observes the human heart is a residence, not a homeland. The more man has the sense of mystery, the more he feels small in front of the impossible, small before the impossible, and great in an attempt to establish a relationship with it. It is the grandeur of Leopardi which is visible at the apex of his poetic expression in the hymn to his lady. At some point in life, Leopardi understood that the sign celebrated in the hymn to Aspasia had taken place. I have no hope of ever seeing you in living form, unless it will be when, naked and alone, my spirit walks those new-found paths towards an unknown place." Unquote. Therefore, for part of his life, so observes Father Giussani, Leopardi had thought of seeing her in the street. Then he lost all hope to see her alive in this world and added, "Unless I can see you elsewhere, but who knows where." What did he think he could see alive in the street? Beauty. Not Aspasia, not one of the dozens of his lovers, but the woman with a capital W, the beauty with a capital B. When Gaetano Corti, his professor, commented a sentence from the prologue of St. John's Gospel, "Word became flesh," the presentiment that Father Giussani had when reading the hymn was clear. The word made flesh means that the beauty became man. Justice became man. Beauty became man. Truth became man. Quid est veritas, ver qui ad est? What is the truth? a man in person. Jesus was prophetized by Leopardi's genius 1,800 years after his existence. This is the last part of the hymn that Giussani recited as a thanking to the communion. If you are one of those eternal ideas that everlasting wisdom scorns to clothe in human form, to bear the pain of life and its mortality in bodies fallen to the earth, or if your home is on another world, one world of countless worlds that whirl, and one star close to you that's brighter than the sun shines down on you, who breathe a purer air, from here on earth, where ears are short and sad, accept your unknown lover in this hymn. Unknown lover. Giussani comments, man as the unknown lover of this beauty made flesh. If she is not in the streets of the world, if this beauty is not in the streets of the world, it will be elsewhere, in another star of the sky, in some Platonic world. Unknown lover, I as your unknown lover, you, God made flesh, unknown lover, ignored by me, unknown to me, a lover I can't remember. Literally, this is the Christian message as I got to know it, as it really is. What Leopardi expresses as the supreme need to see and experience the relationship with beauty made flesh occurred 2,000 years ago. John and Andrew are the first interlocutors shaken by the wonder they perceived in listening to that man speak. Leopardi's genius is very close to the religious genius of Saint John. Man, as described by theologians, especially from the Middle Ages and the Fathers of the Church, man, capax Dei, with a natural desire to see God, well, never could man imagine such an answer to his heart, to the cry of his heart. My heart says of you, seek his face, your face, Lord, I will seek. It is an answer which is impossible to think of before that historical event took place. To John and Andrew, the first who followed him, Jesus Christ reveals himself as a presence who corresponds, who exceptionally corresponds to the most natural desires of the human heart and reason. He shows his exceptionality because he is the man before whom the human heart feels its natural correspondence, which never feels, even in front of the most exciting and beautiful things in existence. None is like him. This was acknowledged by his followers. Saint Peter says, not to believe him, we should not believe what our eyes see. This exceptional evidence does not erase or cancel, it rather highlights human freedom. Come and follow me was the sentence repeated undistinctively to fishermen, prostitutes, wise men and politicians. And hearing this sentence, every one of them was asked to unveil the thoughts of their hearts to decide whether they should stick to their personal interest or their ideas. Jesus Christ does not replace the drama of the human heart, but makes it really possible, because he is the only answer that fully meets all the heart needs. There's a condition, however, which is highlighted in the introduction to the origin of the Christian claim. One could not realize what Jesus Christ means if one does not understand the nature of that dynamism which makes man into a man. Christ, in fact, is the answer to what I am. And only careful awareness of myself, only careful self-awareness can open the doors to Christ and life in Christ. Without this awareness, also the name of Christ becomes merely a name. In the encounter with Christ, the individual experiences passion for his destiny and tenderness towards his thirst for happiness. All this is summarized in a question that no man has ever addressed another man. What good will it be for a man if he gains the whole world yet forfeits his soul? Or what can a man give in exchange for his soul? In belonging to him, it is in belonging to him that the human heart, looking for its destiny, perceives the ultimate, otherwise impossible correspondence. That last evening, during the Last Supper before his death, he tenderly repeated, "Remain in me and I will remain in you." Because without me, you can't do anything. Realistically, without the free help of Christ, man can't live long without harming himself, without gravely going against himself. Man has a drive towards the ideal in himself, but within his personal reality he has an opposing, a contradictory force which tries to draw him. The power, any power, takes advantage of this fragility. Any power, be it small or large, and often we are conniving with this power. In the book that will be presented here at the meeting during the last day, the Equipe book has an interesting passage on power, which says power puts everyone to sleep. Its great system, its great method is that of putting to sleep, that of anesthetizing or inducing atrophy. What is it that is brought to atrophy? Man's heart, man's needs, desires, and goals. A different image of desire or need is imposed. differently from what the heart drives at. Therefore, limited people are generated, prisoners, almost cadavers. Man is one but divided. Man is in flight from his heart, as Saint Augustine says, fugitivus cordis sui. Man does not use or uses only partially or wrongly the criteria which are infallible. The human heart is tempted by dreams. It may become atrophic, reducing the infinite broadness of its desires, because the heart needs happiness, but without faith, this certainty of happiness is not reasonable. This certainty takes the shape which is given to it by the heart, taking a pretext from a presence which is not yet the great presence. Man to a woman, a child to his mother, money to those who love money, and political outcomes for politicians. All this is called a dream. The human heart is tempted by dreams. Instead, the human heart is made for being happy. If the heart recognizes that there is a great presence, then it understands immediately that all certainty that man's desires come true come from the great presence. Therefore, man asks himself questions with the help of the great presence. All circumstances in which man lives are either dream temptations or signs of the ideal, either dreams or signs. Man discovers that all circumstances which are attractive are only provisional and temporary. The final and definite attractiveness is the great presence. The desire, which is also the essence of hope, is that Christ comes and that Christ is reached and glorified even in provisional circumstances. Now, my last point is introduced by another sentence said during the Last Supper. Anyone who has faith in me will do what I have been doing. He will do even greater things than these. Remain in me and I will remain in you is a possible experience today if through baptism you become part of the company of the Church, where the contemporary nature of Christ becomes manifest. It's the only one which allows us to stay before reality as human beings. The Christian company is the place where the experience of that novelty of life, which is otherwise impossible elsewhere, starts to be clear in time. This is where we see the reality of the promise made by Christ to his followers, corresponding to the expectations of our hearts. Those who believe in me, anyone who has faith in me will do what I have been doing. He will do even greater things than these. It's certainly not the promise of mundane success, of great outcomes, of a reachable hegemony, especially in dramatic periods of time when the Church, with all the wounds and sins of its members, makes the questions posed by Eliot very up to date. Eliot, in the choruses of the rock, says, "Why should men love the church? If an altar has to be taken down, first it has to be built." What is then the work for which it is worth living and building and also dying? If the blood of the martyrs is to flow on the stairs, first we have to build the steps. And if the temple is to be taken down, first we have to build it. The greatest work that Christ makes reference to is, in all times and cultures, in all historical moments, change. The rebirth of the self in an encounter with Christ and his free belonging to him, who, as Father Caron said here in Rimini, affects the very way of looking, perceiving, judging, manipulating and dealing with the personal, social, cultural and political reality. And Christ himself insists, saying that no one who has left home or brothers or sisters or mother or father or children or fields for me or the gospel will fail to receive 100 times as much in this present age. Homes, sisters, mothers, fields, and with them persecutions, and in the age to come eternal life. With the gift of the Spirit in baptism, the Christians have the possibility of experiencing reality in a different way, a new way which is rich in truth and love. It is the daily reality which changes. It is the present time. It is in the present time that one receives more. It's the normal characteristics of human existence which change. Love between men and women, friendship among people, the drive to research, the time for studying, the time for working. It's the normal characteristics of human existence through which we proceed towards our destiny without denying anything, but without becoming prisoners of the beauty of transient things. And as the preface to an Ambrosian liturgy that Giussani mentioned in the last book of the Equipe that I just quoted, Lord, my God, by giving us the passing goods, you take us to possessing permanent happiness, and while giving us consolation in the present life, you promise us future joys so that we can start enjoying perennial existence and the beauty of and so that the beauty of transient things does not imprison us. It's a new idea. It's the source of an initiative which generates actions and facts that are part of a different humanity, as recently observed by Pope Benedict at the assembly of the Pope's Council for lay people. The contribution of Christians is decisive only if the intelligence of faith becomes intelligence of reality, a key for judging and changing. And this understanding is full of passion for Christ. Life in all circumstances and all actions is dominated by the idea that he will become manifest, according to the exhortation of Paul to the Corinthians. The love for Christ makes us think that one died for all and all died, and he died for all because those who live no longer live for themselves but for the one who died and resuscitated for them. Every action, every sacrifice, every effort, if experienced in the idea that he was the first to give his life for us, and if it is recognized that all is he, and if we want him to become even more manifest, then we are fully aware of the salvation, of the design for the salvation of the world in Christ. So all actions, even humble and hidden gestures, may have a cosmic value and dignity, from washing the dishes to being the leader of a church, from looking after a child to suffering in a hospital bed, from being in prison to ruling a country. The strength of Christianity, said once a great friend, Father Min, an Orthodox priest, whose martyrdom is celebrated on the 9th of September. The strength of Christianity lies in not denying anything, but stating the full horizons which affirm everything. The grandeur of man, which is a cry of totality in Caligula's, is a cry for love in Miguel Magnara. I am Magnara, a person who lies when he says, I love. And because I told the Eternal that I loved him, my heart is joyful, my hands are desirable as bread. I am Magnara. And the one I love tells me these things did not occur if you stole, if you killed. These events did not occur. He is the only one who is. Let me conclude by reading a letter that was written years ago by a great friend who passed away 2 years ago, Andrea Azziani, a Memor Domini. He wrote this letter to one of his companions in Peru during a holiday of university people. This letter bears witness to the grandeur of the human heart, totally grasped by Christ, and the love for his brotherhood and the possibility of generating new lives. Dear Dado, a big hug, and dear memory, how can I tell you that I miss you? Perhaps you won't believe this, but at a certain point in time, one discovers that we really need each other. Allow me to say this. But in reality, what is necessary is our company, or better, our vocational company. For whom? For ourselves, for our friends, for our enemies, for the rest of the world. I am sure that in this missionary bath, the conscience will powerfully arise in you about what Christ is in us and for us. O quam amabilis es bone Jesu. I felt during a gathering that Father Giussani was anxious to comment these verses. Enjoy your work in this last step. Unity among you should be the leitmotif, should be what really makes the event perceivable. I wish that everyone fall in love, everybody falls in love with what we have fallen in love to. But for this to come true, we have to burn in passion so that Christ reaches us. The fire must burn. Do you remember the lemma of Cantagalli, Siena? Do you remember Saint Catherine? Thank you for your humble and splendid friendly presence. You're like a brother to me. I really hope we can all burn like this. We need this day after day. Thank you.
I'm so enthralled by these last few words. I would like to take up this burning love and ardor, the last words of Stefano. He has allowed us to see that the word heart is not just a word, in other words. It's a part and parcel that makes up human beings, and it's the condition for a human being to be a human being. And I'd like to recall that paradoxical idiocy of that genius of Nietzsche. Very often geniuses say lots of stupid things. He, in fact, made a hymn to contempt. And seeing the heart in this way, of course, it's much more than great contempt. It becomes an enormous hymn to the love of the human being.